question, Brian.
Yeah.
Was there a really long period of time where there was nothing, nothing spoken, nothing? I feel like I missed something. I feel like I usually I'm looking at something or I'm seeing something or I'm thinking of something, but there was nothing. There was no memory, no,
Mm.
and it was eerie. Was a nice word. And I just all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, um, okay, where what was that?
Right.
And I
Where
don't
am
know
I?
what it. Yeah, where I don't know how to answer the question.
Hmm. Yeah, there was a long pause, maybe
Okay,
a couple
yeah.
times, and of course that was deliberate for people
Oh yeah,
to sink
yeah.
into the experience of their their self, their their true self.
Well, if there's no thought, then nothing to remember
Right.
and nothing to hear, nothing to see, and my ears buzz all the time, so I don't even think there was that. It was a real void.
Yeah.
That's the best thing I can, best word I can come up with. And I suddenly realized, oh, wait a minute, there was nothing happening. I wasn't asleep.
Hmm.
I didn't collapse physically like.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the correlation with sleep because at nighttime when we go to sleep, we dream sometimes
Yeah,
and we
yeah,
remember the dream. There's content
yeah,
there. But then we
yeah.
also go into deep sleep where there's the absence of content. And we don't remember that. But it is that space that we correlate with being replenished by sleep. And that's the same space that you're describing where there was nothing to remember. There was no objects that were there, so there's nothing to remember.
If there's nothing to remember, if there's no thought, sound, or sensation or any of that stuff, then how, could there be a benefit? I mean, could there be something to take away? Could there be something to? My question to me was, what do I do with this?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I could say a bunch of words, but I think one should discover that for themselves.
Oh, thank you, Brian. How did I know? How did I know you were going to say that?
Yeah, because I know you will be so curious.
I know.
You won't be able to help but go there. Cool. Does anyone else have anything to share?
I went somewhere I've never been before.
Yeah.
I thought that I fell asleep on you, and then I don't even think I was there.
Yeah.
That was pretty amazing.
Yeah. I don't think I was even there, says a thought.
Yeah.
And that's right. The thought wasn't there.
Yeah. Wow, thank you.
Yeah. But yet you were still there. That's the important distinction to make.
In the beginning, this is the first day I'm coming live, not from my car, which is nice. So at first I was like sitting, and then you were like, it doesn't really matter how you sit. And then I was like hearing my cat and hearing some things, and you were like, it doesn't matter what you hear. And every time I would have a thought or a sensation, I'd be like, just can you let go of that a little bit further? And then eventually I was just somewhere where there was nothing, but there was still me, and I was wrestling with this idea of if there's nothing and I'm still here, what is this place, or what am I?
The theme of today's meditation is going to be, are we willing to consider the idea that anything that we think or even perceive has anything to do with who we are? So let me define momentarily thinking and more so perceiving. Thinking, of course, is related to thoughts, images, and memory. And perceiving is related to the senses. What we see, what we hear, what we touch, etc. And that also should include sensation. And less so sensation like the sensation of the phone, but more so the inner sensation of the body. So are we willing to consider the idea that anything we think or perceive has anything to do with who we are? What's left then? And that's the question. So that'll be our exploration in this meditation moving forward. So if you guys are ready, feel free to put your cell phones on mute so we're not disturbed. Of course, keep your microphones on mute so as not to disturb each other. And if you guys are ready, feel free to close your eyes if you like. Closing our eyes isn't mandatory to meditate. In fact, some of the most transformative experiences when reflecting in the ways that we do in these groups can happen when our eyes are open. And I know some of you are and have been using this time to do that. So it doesn't really, when we're wanting to meditate, it doesn't really matter what we're doing, how we're sitting. Thoughts that may or may not be there, whether they're negative or positive thoughts, as we might define them, what we're feeling, whether those may be negative or positive feelings, as we might define them, what sounds may be present. What really matters is that we simply notice those things when they're there. And we're not looking for the absence of anything. We're not looking for what isn't here. And that statement is suggestive of the intention of a meditation not being to create a meditative state. Because if our intention is to create a peaceful meditative state, then we would be looking for what isn't here, what isn't happening. I think we all know what it's those moments in our life when we've been so focused on what we want. Or to say that differently, what isn't here. And the state of mind, I guess we could say, that produces, what that feels like to be wanting. To want something that isn't here. We all know what that produces, what that feels like. The state of mind that often creates. So again, in meditation, that's not what we do. Rather than that, we simply look for what is already here. What is already happening. Which immediately we start to withdraw. When we do this, we start to withdraw attention from our thoughts. And this reclaimed attention naturally falls into the body, into the senses, into what's already here, what's already happening. And if and when we have sufficiently withdrawn our attention from thoughts, images, and memory, by realizing the limit that the exclusive focus of our attention on thoughts can have for creating what we really want. A deeper connection to ourselves. And the peace and clarity that is inherent in that connection. And as we begin to withdraw our interest, our belief in thought being able to fulfill us, in assigning thought with more credit than it can actually fulfill, with more of a task than thought can actually fulfill, then we may naturally find our attention just settling into the body, into the senses, into what's already here, what's already happening. And depending on the degree in which we are settled in a given moment, is to the degree that time and space or distance will seem like the product of a thought rather than the product of reality. So again, to the degree that we are truly settled, to the degree that we are at least momentarily not investing our welfare or sense of self in what a thought can provide for us, but rather allowing that freed up attention to settle naturally into the body. To that degree, time and space or distance will seem like a product of thought rather than a product of the world. How willing are we to let go of the idea that anything we think or perceive has anything to do with who we are? How willing are we to let go of the idea that anything we could possibly think or perceive has anything to do with who we really are? But the challenge here for some of us at times is what we're left with. Because if this is true, what we're left with to the conscious mind, to the thinking mind, looks like nothing. Nothingness. We're left with nothingness. But due to the limits inherent in the thinking faculties, it cannot truly know or perceive into what we truly are left with, what is truly there. Truly there behind the letting go of anything we could possibly think or perceive. The thinking mind is not equipped to understand what is left when everything is taken away. When we are no longer claiming anything to be ourself. The thinking mind does not have the faculties to understand this. But we can experience it. But when we say we can experience it, we have to be careful, because what is left behind when all thinking and perceiving is no longer believed to be who we are or have anything to do about ourself is not an experience. From the perspective of the conscious mind, it would want to define something as such, but truly, how could who you are be and experience? Does the eyeball consider itself an experience? The eyeball can only know the objects in front of it, but it itself cannot turn around to see itself and experience it as an object, because the eyeball is itself. It can only be itself. It cannot find or experience itself. But it is always itself. Similarly, with the core of who we are, the core of who we are is not what we would or could traditionally call an experience. The core of who we are is simply being ourself. We cannot step outside of ourself, turn around, and point to it. That would be something our conscious thoughts do. Our conscious thoughts likes to label things as something specific. A particular kind of experience, even. But this is just the limitations inherent in thought. Thought, due to the limitations in its perceiving and knowing faculties, cannot possibly know or understand what is left when we no longer are investing or identified with anything that we think or perceive. Thought cannot possibly understand or know what is left. The closest that thought can get is by saying nothing. Nothing is left. When I'm no longer identified with or invested in anything I could possibly think or perceive, then nothing is left. This is as close as thought can get. Where is space or time now? Notice how it may, in response to the question being asked, invoke that thought with its answer, giving you a description or location of where time and space is now. But notice the vehicle in which you were delivered that information. Was it the vehicle of thought, images, or memory? Where is time or space now? And we're not wanting to make philosophical statements. We're just wanting to recognize this inner mechanism, that which creates the experience we call life. The experience of time, the experience of distance. And remember, even though thought may tell you that nothing is left, when we are no longer identified with or invested in what thought or perception tells us, there may be some deeper truth to that. But you'll have to know yourself. What is really left? What is really there? What is in what appears from the perspective of thought to be nothing? What is really there? Another interesting implication of contemplating the nature of time and space as a thought is this also simultaneously undermines the efforts of the ego. We often don't use that word, but because it has a lot of baggage, but it also undermines the ego, the separate self. Another implication for contemplating the nature of time and space and discovering it to be a thought is it also undermines the efforts of the separate self. Particularly, we see through our rigid ideas of being a separate person where challenge may be in our lives. Of course, thought isn't all bad, and there are ways and areas in which it can be used beautifully. And really, it's all beautiful. But for those of us interested in using the understanding we talk about in these meditations in a practical, applied way, would be to recognize the connection between the idea of time and space and an ego or separate self. For if there is no time and space, there is no separate self, no ego. See that the idea of being a separate self, a person, the idea of being a separate self can only exist in a thought. That is where and how that idea is delivered to us. But if we've already undermined the absolute reality of a thought by saying time and space is synonymous with a thought, then that also undermines the efforts of the ego or the separate self. So drawing this connection is a practical, applicable way to use what we talk about in these meditations. Realizing the limits of a thought, or rather, realizing the nature of time and space is a thought, undermines anything we might believe we need to do or say in time and space. It undermines the efforts of a separate self, an ego. Because if we saw the limits of a thought, or if we saw the way in which time and space is synonymous with and limited to thinking itself, then this undermines the efforts of anything an ego would want within time and space. It would see that time and space is not the it would see that there is a deeper reality behind the lens of time and space. When we see the true nature of time and space as a thought, this naturally undermines the efforts of what we could call the ego, which naturally puts us into the seat of the soul. Feel free to ask yourself this final contemplative question. What is it I most need to know moving forward? What would be most helpful for me to know moving forward? And take a moment to either receive that answer or formulate it yourself. What would be most helpful to know moving forward? If you feel you've sufficiently concluded, whatever your takeaway is, whatever you'd like to make more conscious from our subconscious experience, at that point, feel free to bring yourself back to thought and perception and allow yourself to reanimate, so to speak, thought and perception, which includes your body and the world. So as you bring yourself back, your innermost self, back to the outermost experience, and when you feel fully centered and ready to do so, at that point, feel free to take in a deep breath and open your eyes.